My name is Joseph Landing, and I am the author of Bobbitt Rock, a psychological horror novel. This novel came out in October of 2018, and it is my third novel. My other two books are Tame Chakti Arrow Soul and Tame Chakti Battle for Humanity. All the links to my books on Amazon, ebook, print, hardback will be available in the description. You can see them there, and they're available on those websites. I'll be doing a reading of each chapter of Bobbitt Rock on YouTube over the next coming weeks and months. Starting off with the first chapter today, and I'll follow up with the second in time. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, etc., if you like what you hear, because I'd love to read the whole book, actually. So sit back, relax. I'll be reading the first chapter, and I hope you enjoy. Bobbitt Rock, a psychological horror novel by Joseph Landing. Opener. This book is dedicated to my mother and father. Thank you for always believing in me. I love y'all. Chapter 1. The Wretched Man. Opening quote. Tell me about the wretched man. Isaac Murphy slowly raised his head. His eyes burned with grief, sorrow, and above all else, dread. He bore his burning gaze into the eyes of Dr. Adam Brady, who reflexively looked away, troubled by the vile emotions directed at him. Dr. Brady's lips quivered as if uttering the mere words, wretched man, were poisoning his mouth. Isaac flinched, and all the hatred disappeared. The fear was taken over. He shut his eyes tight and pushed through it. His shaking hands, restrained from asylum handcuffs, grasped tightly to the pant legs of his white jumpsuit, standard issue for inmates. His lips parted, and he spat out the truth. The wretched man is the monster on my shoulders and the devil in my mind. I can't escape him. I can run. I can hide. But he will always be on my person, always in my shadow. His eyes will stare at the back of my head where I can't see him. But I know he's there. And everywhere I go, he comes with me, ruining anyone who gets too close. That is my curse. And why does he haunt you? Dr. Brady asked. Because I summoned him at the Bobbitt Rock, Isaac said. Dr. Brady scribbled the words Bobbitt Rock onto his notepad with sweating fingers. Isaac flexed his shaking hands. His nails were rough, dirty, and long. Isaac stared at them, disappearing into his own thoughts. Dr. Brady clicked his pen loudly, snapping Isaac from the daze. Dr. Brady took in Isaac's shabby appearance, a man ruined by regret. His sagging shoulders bore the weight of all the grief and guilt he had borne since the death of his wife and child. His green eyes, bloodshot and exhausted, were tainted with fear. A scraggly beard crawled across his face, and his jumpsuit hung over a gaunt frame. Beneath his left eye was a zipper of stitches. The healing wound was still red and swollen. Take me back, Isaac, to the beginning. I want to know it all. Dr. Brady said. Isaac chuckled dryly at the request without taking his eyes off his own twitchy hands. And why would you believe me? No one else has. Besides Emily. You all just swallowed what the government said and threw me in the locker, along with everyone else. Dr. Brady set his notepad and pen on the ground and raised his hands. I'm all ears. Now tell me about the Bobbitt Rock. Tell me about the wretched man. Tell me about Emily. A ghost of a smile crept across Isaac's face. Okay. Isaac leaned back and closed his eyes as the memories of his childhood flooded forward. The bare interrogation room faded into the thick forests and rolling mountains of Appalachia. The sun shined on a gorgeous spring morning. Wind stirred the leaves of tall trees and birds flitted about in the blue sky. A wide bike trail snaked through the woods, and a group of kids on bikes could be heard pedaling along it. I grew up just outside of Callahan, South Carolina. Every weekend and summer was spent riding bikes down mountain trails, climbing trees, and fishing. There were a lot of kids in my little suburban neighborhood, so, there was always something to do and someone to play with. In his mind's eye, the kids picked up the pace, hooting and hollering with laughter, and bumping each other on the trail. A young Isaac led the pack. My mother and father passed away in an accident when I was 12. Isaac's throat closed. Even after all these years. It hurt. The memory continued, and behind young Isaac, a girl sped up and bumped him with her wheel. Young Isaac turned around and smiled, his sorrow washing away as the girl beamed back at him. She was blonde, with warm green eyes and a little chip in her front tooth, quite the tomboy. Emily sure was something even back then, Isaac mused. Young Emily scooted past young Isaac with a burst of energy. Not to be outdone, young Isaac dropped a gear on his bike and took off after her, leaving the other kids behind. They raced along the mountain trail, gathering speed in the tight race. Young Isaac inched ahead, and young Emily put her head down to keep up. The tree line opened, and a shining lake came into view. The trail dipped towards the lake, and the two kids headed downhill. "Oh, she was a go-getter, a fighter," Isaac said. "We were always competing, to see who was the best." Despite being smaller, younger Emily had a lot of heart and was holding her own against Isaac. With the water only moments away, the two took a deep breath and pushed forward with all they had. Young Emily won by an inch. She jumped off her bike and held up her arms in victory. "I let you win," young Isaac exclaimed. Young Emily rolled her eyes. Young Isaac walked up to her and took her hand. They stared into each other's eyes and smiled. The two kids leaned forward and shared their very first kiss. "I will always love her," Isaac whispered. Isaac's memory darkened. In his mind, the sun disappeared as the kids faded away and darkness rolled across the lake. A storm blew in, and driving rain soaked the landscape. The sound of heavy footsteps was heard as the deep black woods enveloped the world. The death of my parents took me to a dark place. I became reckless. Seeking out danger was how I dealt with his passing. Isaac faltered as more memories flooded back. When my parents died, Emily was really all I had. An ironic smile crossed Isaac's face as he stared at Dr. Brady. Emily became my rock. The woods got darker and thicker in the memory. Heavy breathing filled the air as young Isaac sprinted through the thick underbrush, sending dirt flying from his shoes. His eyes were bloodshot and brimmed with tears. With my parents gone, I was put under the care of my elderly grandmother. I dealt with the pain by being foolhardy. Death had invaded my life, so I was going to confront it. If only I knew then how much more I had to lose. Isaac's face was ashen, and his eyes were cold. Dr. Brady clasped his fingers and leaned forward. "Go on. You can tell me. Tell me about the wretched man. Don't make me ask again." Isaac closed his eyes and gritted his teeth. The Wretched Man is a classic Carolina folk tale. At the highest point, in the thick forest north of Callahan, there is a massive rock formation. Isaac remembered the moment he first took in the awe-inspiring view of the Bobbitt Rock. The giant boulder stood resolute and imposing in the middle of a dead clearing. No plants grew in the perfect circle of the clearing. Only pale dirt dusted the lifeless ground. Young Isaac glanced back at young Emily, who was holding his hand. The boulder in the center was split down the middle, and smaller, razor-sharp rocks littered the dirt around it. "That God-forsaken rock," Isaac whispered. The two kids stepped toward the Bobbitt Rock. It loomed high in the sky, dwarfing them. The entire clearing hissed negative energy, raising the hairs on the backs of their necks. "Everyone knows to stay the hell away from that rock. It's probably claimed dozens of lives over the centuries. Every life but two." Tattered police caution tape dotted the clearing. A collection of crosses with names on them adorned the clearing as well. "It's against the law to climb the rock because of the fatalities, but I wanted to face that danger, so I went in the middle of the night. Emily tagged along to try to talk me out of it, except I could not be deterred, even when a storm blew in." A flash of lightning ripped through the night sky, illuminating the eerie spectacle for just a split second. Young Isaac approached the Bobbitt Rock with young Emily in tow. She was frightened, but he was entranced. "God, I couldn't stop staring at that fucking rock!" Emily just wanted me to be happy, though I don't think she ever thought I'd actually climb the damn thing. When she realized I was serious, well, it was too late to stop me. Young Isaac reached out to touch the icy cold stone. His fingers grazed the wet rock. Time slowed down, and the storm could have been 1,000,000 miles away. A deafening silence overcame him. In a trance, he put a foot up on the first glistening step. The legend goes that a frontier family built a house out in those woods in the early 1700s. One day, their little boy, Bobbit, found the rock while out hunting with his father. He climbed to the very top. His father, noticing his son had gone out of sight, went to look for him. He found the clearing just in time to watch his son jump from the top to his death. The early settlers were very superstitious, you see. They surmised that the rock was cursed by Satan. They believed that when God cast him out of heaven, he must have landed on the rock, splitting it in two. After that, it became his home. So when little Bobbit made it to the top of the rock, Isaac leaned forward and bored his eyes into Dr. Brady's. He saw the devil. And so he jumped. Wouldn't you? Isaac retorted. Dr. Brady cleared his throat and shifted uncomfortably. Isaac chuckled dryly. The rock has claimed so many lives. You know the nursery rhyme that kids used to sing, right? God, my grandmother hated it. Would you care to recite the tune, Dr. Brady? Dr. Brady didn't respond. Isaac shrugged his shoulders and started the rhyme. Round and round the Bobbitt Rock, got to get to the top. Once you make it to the end, the wretched man will be your friend. The temperature in the asylum cell seemed to plummet. Dr. Brady half expected his breath to frost. He took a deep breath to regain his composure. Continue on, he stated. Isaac glared down at the ground. Emily touched the rock too. Young Emily recoiled from the cursed stone in horror, stifling a scream. She shouted for young Isaac to come down. Young Isaac glanced back at her, but continued the climb. Young Emily pleaded with him and even pounded the stone, but young Isaac paid no attention to her. He wanted to face death. He wanted to see the devil. In his mind's eye, that was the only thing that could soothe his pain. With tears streaming down his face and rain pelting him, he scaled the razor-sharp and jagged stone. Nothing was going to stop me. Young Isaac took it one step at a time. Although he was careful, his foot suddenly slipped, and he clawed wildly for purchase. His fingers found a knife blade of a handhold and took hold of it. Blood immediately oozed from a slice in his thumb. Absolutely nothing would stop me. Blood ran in wet rivulets down his arm and onto his face as he pulled himself up the unforgiving rock. The pain from his cut made him falter and glance at the ground. No stopping now. By that point, I'd die before I gave up. Mom was dead. Dad was dead. What the hell did it matter? You mattered. To Emily, Dr. Brady whispered. Isaac gazed at him sadly. I know. Young Isaac remembered young Emily's terrified face, gazing up at him from the ground as he scaled the rock, already halfway there. He was exhausted and hanging on by a thread. A violent gust of wind buffeted him, and he nearly fell as a tremendous clap of thunder shook the world. Young Isaac managed to hold on for dear life until the pounding wind calmed. My muscles were screaming at me. Every part of my body was begging me to go back down. But not my heart. I should have gone back. God, I should have gone back. Young Isaac was soaked and frozen to the bone. Cradling his injured hand against his stomach, he approached the leap. The leap is where everyone dies. You must jump the gap from the right boulder to the left. But the face of the left boulder is as smooth as glass. There's no purchase at all, nothing to grasp or grab onto. The rock is so tough that it can't be pierced with any equipment, and there's no way to throw a rope around because of the angle. Young Isaac stared at the sheer rock face behind him. He would have to push away from the right wall, turn 180 degrees, and then what? What was he supposed to grab? It was a sheer face with no crack or blemish anywhere to be seen. He, like everyone before him, would surely fall to his death. How did you make the leap? Dr. Brady asked. I gave it a sacrifice. Young Isaac held up his bleeding hand, and rubbed the wound on the rock face in front of him. He drew a line in blood that trickled down. I jumped. For just a moment, young Isaac was suspended in midair between the two halves of the boulder, with an over 40-foot drop onto razor-sharp rocks waiting beneath him. He made the midair turn and planted a foot onto the left rock face. Despite no holds, he clung to the rock and started skittering up like a spider. Impossible! You can't have made that jump, Dr. Brady insisted. Oh, I made it, but I don't really remember what happened after the jump. I just remember the top. It was a flat little surface, no larger than a coffee table. However, it had just enough room to stand up on. Young Isaac rose to his feet and stood up tall. He was a pale silhouette standing atop that midnight boulder, lit by strikes of lightning. He raised his arms and shouted with all he had, but his words were lost in the storm. Young Emily could only stare in awe, still gripped by fear. Young Isaac had done it. He had climbed the Bobbitt Rock. The small smile on Isaac's face faded into a grimace. I don't remember coming down the rock. One moment I'm at the top, then I'm back with Emily. Young Emily took young Isaac's hand. He was in a daze and shaken. Did you see anything at the top of the rock? Dr. Brady asked. No, not at the top. Slowly, young Emily pulled young Isaac away from the Bobbitt Rock to leave. As she led him out of the clearing, young Isaac glanced back at the rock with dread, suddenly filled with the fear he should have felt in his climb. He shuddered as they reached the tree line and disappeared into the brush. When they reached the trail, they hopped onto their bikes. Young Isaac checked behind his back again, but found nothing. The storm continued to rage, with bright lightning streaking the sky. He was behind me. I could feel his eyes, Isaac whispered to himself. The two took off down the trail. Young Emily was disturbed while young Isaac was near catatonic. Check left, check right, check up, Isaac whispered. He winced and grinded his teeth. You know that feeling when you're being watched? He asked Dr. Brady. Imagine if that feeling never went away. Imagine if someone was boring their eyes into the back of your skull, but you could never find them. You could never escape their gaze. Safely out of the woods, the two kids silently pedaled towards their neighborhood. Neither said a word. At the turn, they stopped. This was where they split up to go to their homes. Young Emily tried to say something, but couldn't find the words. Young Isaac managed a fake smile before pushing down the pedals and taking off in the opposite direction. Young Emily stifled a sob and then headed off reluctantly. Young Isaac was now alone. He pedaled down the empty streets toward his grandmother's house. Again, he felt that prickling sensation that he was being watched. He looked to the left, to the right, and above him toward the night sky, but there was no one to be seen. I could feel his eyes on me. It was as if he was sitting on my shoulders, looming above my head, but every time I looked, he would just dodge out of sight. But I knew he was there. The wretched man. Young Isaac pedaled faster. Sweat beaded down his forehead and his heart pounded. Meanwhile, Isaac wrung his hands as he told Dr. Brady, God, he was right on me. I could feel him. The wretched man. Young Isaac burst into tears as he rode until his muscles screamed and his bike rattled. Had to go faster. Had to keep pedaling. Finally, young Isaac got home. He jumped off his bike and bolted into the house. He slammed the front door behind him and locked it shut. Home. Safe. Young Isaac flicked the light switch, but the overhead lights did not turn on. The storm must have knocked the power out. His grandmother approached him, worry on her wrinkled face. She clutched a flashlight with a shaking hand and wore a pale old nightgown. Isaac, where have you been? Don't tell me you've been out in that storm at this hour. You have me worried sick. Young Isaac hung his head, but embraced his grandmother, relieved to not be alone. As he did, the power cut back on. The two breathed a sigh of relief. I'm going to bed, young Isaac said. He quickly made for his room and shut the door, locking it behind him. He undressed and got into bed. He pulled the covers up to his chin and stared at the lamp next to his bed. He reached a hand out to click it off, but hesitated. Instead, he withdrew his hand and tucked it under the covers. He laid his head back and stared up at the ceiling fan. He shut his eyes, but they immediately snapped back open. He sat up in bed, worried. The door to his closet stared at him. He hopped out of bed and opened the door. Empty. "Do you believe in God, Dr. Brady?" Isaac questioned. "Yes," Dr. Brady answered immediately. "Remember what I said about God casting Satan out of heaven?" Young Isaac checked under his bed and found nothing. He reached into a cabinet and withdrew a little pocket knife. He clicked it open and hopped back into bed, but left the lamp on. But what if instead of just casting Satan out, God cursed him? Young Isaac pulled the covers up to his nose and shivered. Confining him to earth and forcing him to walk amongst men. Young Isaac's eyes darted left and right across his bedroom. Left, clear. Right, clear. Up, clear. Forever. Left, clear. Right, clear. Up, clear. He can't die, but left, clear. Right, clear. Up, clear. He never stops aging. Left, clear. Right, clear. Up, clear. Left. The wretched man was kneeling in the corner of the bedroom. His face was buried in his hands. He was fully illuminated by the harsh lamplight. The wretched man's skin was like leather, withered to jerky consistency from millennia of exposure. Parts of it had torn like tissue paper, with the skeleton fully visible beneath. His frail bones were glass, with broken pieces jutting out at hideous angles. Vile pus and viscous fluids oozed from hundreds of sores and infected wounds. Each breath was agony, a wheeze that rattled and sputtered in his collapsed lungs. He fought for every inhale and burned for every exhale. His face was still obscured by his gnarled fingers, with nails that had grown to grotesque lengths. It is best that no one ever sees his face. You can beat him, crush him, stab him, burn him, shoot him, but he will never stop coming for you. Young Isaac was frozen with fear. His eyes were as wide as saucers, and a silent scream escaped his lips. The wretched man began crawling toward the bed. Living for him is agony, and the only way he can feel joy. As the wretched man crawled, his face sagged down to the floor like a fleshy appendage. Bones cracked and split as he slimed across the carpet. He lifted a skeletal hand, and his massive talons of nails pressed against the bed covers. Those nails had never stopped growing. As if others suffer with him. The wretched man heaved himself onto the bed in a horrifying display of snapping bones and tearing flesh. Black and green ooze dropped onto the sheets. He latches onto them for life. Everywhere they go, doom will surely follow. The wretched man shoved his face next to Isaac, and a piece of leathery flesh burst from the side of his throat with the effort. He whispered to me. Black, rotted lips cracked back to show a mouth with black gums full of holes. The stench of sulfur poisoned the room as he spoke the words, "You are mine." The wretched man pressed his face into Isaac's, and a blood-curdling scream rent the air.